evening, everyone, from Lane Transit District headquarters inside, as well as those of you who are joining online. Thank you so much for being here. My name is Carl Ye. I'm the chair for the LTD Budget Committee. I would like to call this meeting into order. It is Tuesday, November 7th, 2023. Let's do a roll call. I'm going to go through a list of names. Kelly Sutherland. Oh, not here. Gino Grimaldi. Here. Heather Murphy. Here. Lawrence Green. Michelle Weber.
Here.
Pete Knox.
Here.
Susan Cox.
Here.
Great. Darvin Fowler.
Here.
Thanks, Darvin. Jess Roshak.
Here.
Thanks, Jess. Brandon Rogers. Not here. Stephen Wheeler.
Here.
Thank you. Gary Wildish. The online. Not here. Jason Williams.
I'm here.
Great. Thank you, board members and community members of the LTD board, or sorry, budget committee, for being here. Next, we'll go to comments from the general manager.
Well, just briefly, I want to thank the committee for taking the time to be here, especially the appointed ones. Board members are here all the time, and I want to thank you too. With taking the time out of your day to help us in this process is important for the future of the organization and for how we serve our community. So I just want to take time to thank you, and I'll yield this time unless you have any questions for me.
Great. Thank you so much, Jameson. Next, we have audience participation. Just want to check with our clerk. Do we have anyone who is interested in providing testimony to the board or the budget committee?
No.
Okay, I'll dispense with the information regarding participation. So next we'll go straight into our items for action. I see that we have, let's see, our first presenter is Pamela Strutz. Did I pronounce that correctly? Strutz, I am so sorry. Thank you, Pamela. Director of Finance.
All right, good evening. We are here to talk about the long-range financial plan and the community investment plan tonight. At the May 2nd Budget Committee meeting, we informed the committee that the long-range financial plan was not being included in the fiscal year 24 budget process, as it was in need of restructuring due to the post-pandemic state of the economy. Can you guys hear that echo? Okay, I suppose I have to have that on, don't I?
Yes.
Okay, I'll try not to talk. That sounds better. Oh, that sounds better. So, okay. This presentation is to serve as the first draft for the budget committee for the 2024-2033 long-range financial plan. First of all, I would like to thank Hart McDowell, who was one of our transit development planners, for his significant work and contribution to the long-range financial plan and workbook as we know it today. Hart recently took a different position, so I wanted to be sure and give him credit for his assistance on our plan tonight. And I would also like to thank the budget committee members and board members tonight for their volunteer time and contribution to Lane Transit District. Thank you. Here, our agenda tonight will be we'll be reviewing how our long-range financial plan fits with our planning documents. We will also see some key inputs and trends that are impacting our financial plans. Also tonight, Matt Imlach will present the draft community investment plan, also known as the CIP, which is a key input to the long-range financial plan. And finally, we will conclude with a few comments about what's next in our financial planning. Oh, you can go 2 slides. Okay, one right there. Thank you. The long-range financial plan is one of 5 key documents that guide our district's planning. It's compiled from several years of actual financial information and numerous economic estimations and assumptions. As the annual budget is being completed, it is used to update the financial data in the plan. Two key budget areas have an especially large impact on the long-range financial plan. These are wage and benefit estimates and the expected cost of our largest expenses, parts and tires, fuel, and technology. The community investment plan also drives the long-range financial plan. As the new CIP is being developed, we work together to find a balance between meeting both our capital needs and our financial needs. Throughout our planning, we use the strategic business plan and the long-range transit plan goals as guardrails to be sure that we are making progress toward these key goals. This evening, we'll be presenting the drafts of the 2024-2033 long-range financial plan and CIP. Just as a reminder, there's no decision that's being requested tonight. This presentation is for information and discussion purposes. Next slide. This diagram shows the budget schedule incorporating the long-range financial plan and community investment plan documents. The previous budget schedule was to have a draft CIP in the fall, and the long-range financial plan was presented with the annual budget in the spring. We are adding updates in the fall and winter for both the long-range financial plan and the CIP. These meetings will occur prior to completing the new year budget. We are doing this to provide more visibility to financial planning process and to provide more opportunity for our full budget committee to give input. After the budget committee meeting in either January or early February, we will follow the previous budget schedule with the plan to present the final long-range financial plan and CIP along with the budget for approval in May. Next slide. Key inputs to our long-range financial plan. And I promise this is the longest slide that we have tonight. So we have several key inputs to our long-range financial plan. We have actuals, budget estimates, and our budget requests during the year. In today's draft version, we are using the current year, fiscal year 24 budget. In the final version that we'll present in the spring, we'll be using next year's fiscal 25 budget. The next thing is staffing, and we use current historical and projected staffing. The long-range financial plan includes 20 years of historical staffing patterns that are used to estimate the staffing needed when service changes are anticipated. We know that our staffing patterns have changed since before the pandemic, and this has been worked into the projections as best we can at this point. This is an area that we continue to monitor closely since personnel costs make up 3/4 of our operating requirements. The next thing that we look at is tax revenues and Oregon economic analysis variables. Our tax revenue forecasts are based on historical trends during economic upturns and downturns. As mentioned at a recent Finance Committee meeting, the LTD payroll tax has been increasing slightly each year since 2016 and will level out at 0.08% in 2025. This rate increase makes up a relatively small portion of our expected tax increase. Job growth and wage inflation are the key drivers of our payroll tax. The next thing is operational data. Operations data has been analyzed to identify specific cost and revenue relationships. This information is used to project the impact of our service changes, and we'll talk a little bit about what our expected service changes are in just a few more slides. We also include other short and long-range plans. The long-range financial plan cannot be done without considering other projects and plans of the district. Although the long-range financial plan is primarily a financial document, we are careful to consider the impact from other planning work that is in progress. So the next thing is transfers. So our general operating fund supports all of our programs, not just the general fund programs. And in order to do that, we transfer general funds out to help support those other programs. The focus of the long-range financial plan is operational, and specifically it's for our general fund resources and requirements. There are other programs that the general fund supports, and these are then reflected in the transfers. The needs of the other programs are considered when we work on the long-range financial plan, and as are our capital needs. And tonight, where we will be focusing on just the capital needs of the transfers during our CIP presentation. So in summary, we utilize over 30 assumptions and elements when we're looking when we're working on our long-range financial plan. Some are interdependent, some independent, some are both. 1/2 of these are tied to service levels. And we also we are looking at approximately 20 years from 2002 to 2023 of historical actuals, financial, operational, staffing, and in particular interest was what has happened in the past during recessions. So there were a couple of recessions during that 20-year period, and we spent quite a bit of time looking at what happened to our operating costs, what happened to our revenue, and then trying to predict what those relationships could possibly be. The time last year's long-range financial plan was put together, everybody was still talking about a recession. So that's not so much now. So it's not as much of a worry now, but I am happy to, and I do want you to know that we feel like that if that should happen, we do have data that we can go back to try and predict to see what, that we would be able to plan ahead for that. So, okay, next slide. Okay, some of the changes since our last long-range financial plan. We had to adjust our historical trends to account for a post-pandemic economy and workforce. It takes more staff now to provide the same hour of service along with higher operational costs. The healthcare costs are pegged at 7% per year in our forecast, but we know the actual trend could be higher. There will be changes in our federal support with COVID funding ending, and we know that we are going to have increased support from the employee-funded State Transportation Improvement Fund. We are also taking advantage of the current federal interest in supporting transit improvements, and we have updated our CIP accordingly. So, okay, now my favorite part, we get to the numbers. So, okay, we will start with our operating revenues. Our fare revenues are showing an increase while service is increasing. So on the bottom line on this slide, you'll see that we have forecasted a service increase for the first 3 years of our financial plan. And with the plan to, in the fiscal year 26-27, to get back to our level of service that we had pre-pandemic. That was the goal. We left it flat after that point, mostly just because we are looking at what it means to be a mobility provider in our area. And we're in the process of deciding what that might look like. So we felt like if we took our current basic service, increased it back to where the pre-pandemic level was, and then just left it there, that would give us room then to be able to reflect what the differences might be looking at a different type of service later. It's not really, it's not really included in this plan, but we will be looking at that in the future. The other key item on here is advertising revenue, which we did make a conscious decision to stop having advertising revenue, but we are looking at that again, and that's reflected in this plan. Okay, next slide. Visual chart is nothing really more to add onto here. This just shows what the passenger revenue looks like in a chart basis. And it does show over the range of our financial years, the 2024 to 2033, that the average is about a 5% increase per year, but that's actually front-loaded for our years that we have service increasing, and then it's planned to be flat after that. And so, okay, next slide. In our non-operating revenue areas, of course, our payroll taxes are the biggest amount here. We're showing a continued growth in that area. Our federal assistance line is the blue or purple line that's in the middle. And some of you who have seen the last few years of the long-range financial plan may remember that one of the key assumptions of our last long-range financial plan was to reduce our operating assistance from the federal sources. And we've looked at that and taken a pretty hard look at that. And with the increased costs and the increased staffing levels, we don't feel like that is actually possible to be able to do. So this long-range financial plan does keep the operating assistance from the federal basis. So that's a particular federal source of revenue, 5307, 50% of that can be used for operating resources. So, and then in addition to that, we are showing in the next line down, the pinkish red line is STIF, State Transportation Improvement Fund. That's the other payroll-based tax that we receive. That's the one that the employees pay out of their wages. And in our current biennium budget for our STIF funding, there is $8 million set aside to help assist us in increasing our services back. So that is we're not going to be making use of that in our current year, but we are planning to increase service for our next fiscal year. We will start using part of that money, and we do plan to continue to use that as we increase services over the next several years. And that funding is available to us, and what is shown on here in the forecast is not the full amount of the $8 million that's set aside. So we do have some space available in that. The other key item that's on this slide is just our interest. All of you know what the interest rates, both good and bad, are doing right now. And because we do have a good level of working capital, we've been the benefactor of the increase in the interest rates, and we are earning more than we had expected. And we just continued that on. So, okay, next slide just shows a visual of our tax revenues to see that we just are showing a steady growth in our tax revenues. Okay, and then you can go to the next slide. And then this is our federal grant revenues, and those have a tendency to go up and down just depending on what projects and what we have going on. You can see the bigger increase throughout the pandemic years, and that does reflect the additional funding we received from the COVID era funding. Okay, next slide. All right, operating requirements. So under our operating requirements, of course, personnel services is the largest item on here. We have included our bargaining agreement through 2026, the one that's currently in place, 2.5% annual wage increases for other employees, and then our medical cost at 7% per year. And even with those, you do see that is our largest driver of our costs throughout all of the years. Materials and services, we are averaging at a 2% inflation per year, and then just a small amount of increase for our insurance and risk. Part of what's driving our personnel services is when we expand services, of course, we have to hire more drivers. Currently, we have about 170 drivers. Our budget this year was 195. We're working on trying to get back up to that. In order to meet the service requirements that are in this long-range financial plan, we will need to add 40 more drivers over the next 2 years. So we'll be actively looking at recruiting, and I mean, we are already very actively working on recruiting, and that will definitely be a focus for us in the future. Okay, you can go to the next slide. So this is the chart visual of personnel service expense. You can see the jump between fiscal year 23 and 24. That increase was 17.5%, and that includes the impact of the collective bargaining agreement plus catching up on some other wage adjustments to market that needed to be done. After that, our annual or the average increase is about 4.3%. Per year after that first initial jump. Okay, you can go to the next slide. Materials and services look relatively flat, just reflecting our 2% increase. The first few years is a larger increase because those are the years the service levels are planning to be increasing. So we'll obviously need more materials and services as well. So, okay, next slide. The other piece of our requirements is our transfers. We talked about them a few minutes ago. Transfers are forecast to be flat other than the capital projects, which is tied to the timing in the CIP. Included in our transfers are specialized services in Medicaid growth. We are planning during our service increase. Those will also increase, but then flat after that. Our point-to-point program, our grants are completing in that program, but the van pool will be continuing on. And our sustainable services reserve, which is the green line that you can see up there, is we're just planning to leave that flat, and the amounts that are being set aside for that are enough to keep that level at about 2 months of operating expenses. Okay, next slide. This is just a diagram of what our operating transfers look like, so not too much to see there. And then the next slide will show our capital projects. Okay, you can go to the next one, Allie. Yeah, so there's our capital projects. So capital projects is all about timing and funding, and most recently actually being able to get the supplies and things that we need to be able to finish our projects. So this line it does go up and down quite a bit, and it's often that we budget for what we think that we would be able to accomplish in the year in our projects that are in process, but are not, for various reasons, aren't able to complete those. So, so this one is based on the CIP directly, and it reflects the amount of general funding that is put towards our capital projects. And the general fund is used for match to our federal and state grants. And then we do also have other things that we do that are capital related that are 100% funded by the general fund. So, okay, next slide. Okay, I'm going to turn this over to Matt. He's going to talk about the community investment plan, but I wanted to pause and see if does anybody have any questions about our resources or requirements. After Matt, for those of you who enjoy looking at the bottom line, I promise that when Matt finishes up, we'll when I complete the presentation, then we'll go over the bottom line and the funding, and I'll bring all that together. So. Okay, any questions?
Yes, first, Pamela, thank you very much for your presentation on the long-range financial plan. And yes, definitely, any questions for Pamela? Yes, Gino.
You mentioned increased services.
Mm-hmm.
How did you determine what number to put in there in terms of increased
our
services? Is it what's available? Is it based on some type of analysis or just totally?
Yes. Both, yes. And so our goal was to get back to pre-pandemic, and we based it on revenue hours. There were, and I should, correct me if I'm wrong, Tom, there were some specific routes that we discontinued. We'd like to add those back, and we do have a specific goal and a plan for that, but it was basically to try to restore our service back to the pre-pandemic level. So, did I say that right?
So just follow up, there's a significant amount of planning work that's either being undertaken or will be undertaken. Would that, any service additions that produces be in addition to this number?
So,
I'm getting a nod from Tom. Okay, thank you. Working on it. Yep. No, thank you.
anybody else?
Yeah, is there any other questions? I actually have one, but I'll wait to see what other people have. Okay, I'll ask a couple questions. The first one is, was the pension plan one of the inputs for the long range plan?
It is, so our pension plan, our contributions and the expenses are two different, in two different areas. One is strictly based on payroll. So as our payroll goes up, then our pension contributions go up. But in addition to that, we are making what we call level dollar payments. So we're trying to get our pension funded to a 90% level that was recommended by our advisors. And so in order to do that, we have a payment plan that we're making over a number of years. So we're making additional payments to make sure that we have that fully funded, particularly the salaried plan.
Mhm.
So in the salaried plan, that plan was basically sunset or stopped taking new members back in 2012. So as people go through that plan, we want to especially make sure that the salaried plan is fully funded for when those people start retiring.
That's great. So it sounds like that input was taken into account, it's just under payroll. Got it. Thanks. My next question was, were there any plans to decrease fares? And because I noticed on the chart that it looked like as of 2027 and beyond, it was just went flat. And I was wondering how you was that just a best guess based on what you know now?
So yeah, fares are based on the service level. So so we increased the service level up into 26, 27, and then we left the service level flat. And we didn't anticipate in this particular plan any reduction in the cost of a per fare cost or a pass cost. We just left that level. Yeah.
And my last question. Oh no, go ahead, Jess.
Please.
Yeah. Oh, last question is, I noticed in the tax revenue growth graph, it just kept going up, and I just wondered, I was a little nervous about that projection. I was wondering, could you give us some more detail about how that's might be either reliable or maybe not as reliable as we think?
Yeah, so the tax revenue is based on a regression analysis that goes back for 20 years, looking at different economic indexes in our area. And then we take the Oregon economic analysis, the most recent one, which the September one is the most recent one that we used for this, and then take those same levels and put them into our analysis, and then basically look and see what happens to the tax revenue from that. The main drivers of our tax revenues are wage growth, just in the numbers of people and the payroll level itself in our area. And then the other is just wages increasing themselves, wage inflation. And so in the analysis that's here, because they're not looking at a recession, they're predicting that wages are going to continue to grow. That is definitely reflected in our payroll tax revenue continuing to go up. It's at about a 4% increase. But we will be, of course, looking at this again in January, and there will be another economic analysis that will come out in the fall or in the early winter, and we'll take a look and see what they're predicting at that point.
Oh, thank you very much for that explanation. So it's not just hopes and dreams; it's actually based on historical statistical analysis. Okay,
Yes,
that's good to know. I'm going to go to Jess.
You nailed it.
Oh, I did. Oh, okay, good. Hey, you're welcome.
yeah.
So, but just checking online, were there any budget committee people online that would like to ask a question? I think Allie will help us out with that one.
Darwin shaking his head.
So, oh, good. Okay, thanks for checking in there. Great. We'll go ahead and move forward with Matt then.
Okay.
Thank you very much, Pamela.
Thank you, team. I appreciate the time, and you do see another AIS, but given the fact that the long-range financial plan and the CIP are so closely tied together, we're kind of putting this in the middle, and then Pam, as she alluded to, will come back and you get to finish off with her. So some of you, or I've had the privilege to present to some of you in this room in regards to our CIP, or a community investment plan. And so some of it will be a little bit redundant for folks, but part of the presentation, at any point, if there's any questions, you can alert. I'd love to stop and pause. I don't want to go past a question that you might have and hit it. But what you see on the board is really some of our guiding principles. So in June of 2022, we adopted a community investment policy, kind of given a framework. And those things that are shown up there are really the guiding principles of what we want the community investment plan, the CIP, to be. And again, it's to deliver safe, equitable, and dependable transportation services and facilities in an affordable, efficient, and cost-conscious manner, to invest in transparent, financial, sustainable manner that is able to withstand annual revenue fluctuations. So in the event that payroll doesn't do that, how can we respond to those? To adjust, third point, to changes in community service needs and strategic plan priorities, to comply with all local, state, federal regulatory requirements, and then to be a part of a climate change solution while building the community resiliency. So as we look at what the community needs us to be, we want to respond, and our CIP wants to be reflective of that. Go to the next slide. And there's a lot of stuff here in this slide. Really what I want to do at a high level is LTD has a process. So we'll have inputs coming in. And just because someone has an idea, we want to vet that idea before it finds itself on this paper, which we will get into later. But that has inputs. We look at it from an internal process. Does it meet our guiding principles? And then there's some vetting and then prioritizations of that. So in the next slides, we'll get to what we'll talk to about tier levels. So we have a tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3. And that allows us to figure out the tier 1. The tier 1 means we have a funding resource for that. We've got the grant, it's ready to go. Tier 2 is we have a plan for that. So we identified the funding source. Tier 1 and tier 2, as far as the prioritization, those will be reflected in the first 3 years that you'll be seeing. If it's a tier 3 where we're still looking for the funding opportunities, we know we don't want to respond. We want to be adaptable to respond to emergent needs, but there are times where we know we don't have the funding. There's a process to get to the funding, and we want to push that out, but we have the ability to bring that in if we can, and it makes sense through the vetting process. So we'll get into more of the tier 1 and tier 2 and tier 3, but want to highlight that specifically. And then the adoption. So we want to come and, as we talk about transparency, talk to committees, talk to the community about this. We do have an actual public hearing, which in the earlier slides that Pam provided actually talks about that adoption process. This is more just a communication form right now. We will go out to public hearing as part of our budget process to get other inputs from the community. So next slide, please. This gets into the numbers of the projects. So in your presentation, you'll actually have later pages, a lot of these project headings that give more words to it. I'll just touch base on the headings itself. If you have any questions, you could refer to the later pages in the document, or you can ask, and I'll be able to provide additional. So in our CIP, we kind of look at 2 different buckets. The first one is improvements, and the other one is state of good repair. And the state of good repair is what you actually see on the presentation. So we have state of good repair projects, and those are really the mandatory things. So when we look at buses, we need to make sure that we have buses on the road that meet the state of good repair, and we consistently want to be investing in that. You see some facilities related projects up there, as well as some tech and infrastructure, as you guys are familiar with, some more than others, but the infrastructure, the technology aspects, you need to continue to be on top of those things, because if you don't, you have vulnerabilities out there. And so we categorize that in the tech and infrastructure. So when we look at our state of good repair, you only see 3 kind of subcategories of that. And it's facilities, you have the fleet, And then you have tech and infrastructure. Those are keeping our facilities and buses and tech in a state of good repair. And those are a mandatory required thing to make sure we're delivering what we need to on a daily basis. When we go through that list and you see a lot of projects, a lot in facilities, that's the majority of that. But the majority of the cost in our state of good repair comes with our fleet. And the reason is it's expensive to purchase vehicles and continue to replace those. But it's an important investment to make sure that we're investing in the right things. So when you look at the total costs, and we'll get that in the next slide, you'll see the majority of the costs reflected in our state of good repair is from our fleet. And then lastly, the tech, and I'm happy to answer any questions about any of these projects. So I'll take a quick pause to see if anyone has anything they want to ask in regards to the projects listed up here.
Question.
Yes.
Is this the one, are we at the point with the alternative fuels project?
To answer, so great question. We will get to the alternative
This
fuels
isn't it yet.
project.
Okay.
It is reflected in the improvements category. That's new infrastructure coming in. It is not a part of the state of good repair listed here,
Okay.
but we will talk about that. But
I
we
have
do
a
not
question
have
on that when we get to it.
Okay.
I just actually haven't gotten to it.
No,
That's
no,
fine.
great question.
Okay.
So we will hit that.
I always have questions about the non-revenue fleets.
Yes.
And just more details about that, because I know what they are, but I'm always sort of, my eyes are always wide open by what the monetary need has been on these, and, talk more about how many we have, how many we're, whether we're repairing or replacing, and what the money's for.
It's a great question. I don't know the numbers off the top of my head. I got general ideas, but when we talk about non-revenue vehicles, those are vehicles that are helping the service itself, but it's not taking passengers. We're not collecting fares to do that. But a prime example is we have a lot of police interceptors, vehicles out there for public safety to support the needs, as well as our transit supervisors. I would say we have about 10 of those vehicles ish, 12 of those vehicles. And that really helps ensure that where our staff is, we're able to respond to those needs. As you know, buses are out through our whole entire territory, and being able to help support our operators is incredibly important. So that's the largest team of those vehicles. The other one is the facilities team. The facilities teams are outfitted with non-revenue vehicles to really go out and respond. So we have campuses throughout. It's just not here. I liked how Mr. Ye said the headquarters. So we're not only headquarters, we have Eugene Station, Springfield Station, Santa Clara, and being able to respond to those and take you're mobilizing your equipment to those. So that's another key work group. Fleet has another 2 vehicles that they're responsible for to respond to needs out in the system. So when we talk about those are the 3 key ones. I can't forget operations. We have what we call this term taxis for non-revenue vehicles. That's where we have operators report to work here, but they're relieving potentially other operators out in the system. So they'll start here, drive to Springfield or Eugene Station, drop the vehicle off, get on their bus to do their duties for the day, and then someone who's ending their work at Eugene Station would then be coming here. So you'll see those, and there's many vehicles, non-revenue vehicles for that work group as well.
That's great details. Would you be estimating in the neighborhood of 50 or so of the non-revenue fleet vehicles?
In this, I would say 38 is what comes to mind. We can get the exact number for you. Yes.
Thanks so much.
Check if there are any questions online.
No.
Oh, great. Please proceed, Matt.
Well, and I think Jessica asked it as a great question. So all of those, so you see 4 categories. 3 of our main, it's the bus fleet. So we have a quantity of buses that we need to maintain. The specialized services, so those are ride source vehicles. Those are other ADA services that we provide outside of the community, those are as well. So each of those categories has a quantity of vehicles that you're replacing on a consistent cycle. So thank you. So this came from our finance committee. And so there's an asterisk here that I just wanted to highlight. At that committee, Mr. Grimaldi asked in regards to what are those changes. So as we go through each presentation, we want to highlight the changes. And so that there's an asterisk by that. The next slide, you can transfer there, Allie, will kind of highlight what those changes are for transparency. And so the first one is our 10-year specialized fleet replacement. You'll see what we presented at at 9/12, the finance committee, and what we're presenting here. There's a difference. And as you see, there's that 10-year outlook. That's the finance up at the top, and below is what we're presenting today. There's a large number. If you look at that, there's over a $2 million difference where we're needing more funding. That could be alarming, but let me assure you, there isn't a concern. What happened there was some of the vehicles we thought we were going to be getting last fiscal year, which we programmed for that, we didn't get them. And therefore, the funds that were identified and secured there are essentially getting rolled over. So we're good from a financial aspect, but we did want to highlight that. And then as we look at the whole 10 years, there's going to be some increases and decreases throughout. Some of that, as we take a calculation of what vehicles are costing, a quantity, there's a little bit of a price adjustment. So the major one in the specialized services from an overarching total is really identified in that 10-year specialized services. The other one is the non-revenue fleet that was talked about, and there are some differences as well. Similarly, when we're looking at some additional vehicles that we're needing, you're seeing an additional vehicle in this current fiscal year that we're needing as well. And so there's smaller numbers when you look at the 10-year non-revenue vehicles year over year, but some of that also has to do with costs of goods for that. And then the last one that was changed or updated was the tech. It's the IT hardware and software replacement. And there's just an additional project that we're needing to do for the IT hardware and software that was looked at. And that specifically was some of our wireless access points was overlooked. And so we're bringing those things, and that's some of our needs for the hardware and software throughout. So wanted to highlight those, and yes, Mr.
First of all, thank you for highlighting those. It's helpful.
Yes.
We talked earlier about increased services.
Yes.
Will that require an increase in the number of buses?
Right now we're good, and I think we're at the point where from pre-COVID we haven't reduced the quantity of vehicles, and we're looking at that. And when you're bringing on electric vehicles, there's an ability to do that to make sure that we have vehicles. So as we're responding to additional service, we will not at this point see a need for increased buses. As we're looking at some of our planning processes, that will help identify additional vehicles that may be needed to make sure our fleet responds to appropriate for our service level. Thank you.
I am racking my brain and trying to recall a few years ago when we were looking at the budget, and the major bus components are always, of course, a huge part of the budget.
Yeah.
Got it. We started talking about the fleet replacement and the purchase of new buses and how that might impact and reduce maybe some of the bus components. But I see, is this reflective of just increased costs that we didn't foresee? Or with new buses, you'd think that the components costs might level off. I don't know. Can you speak to that?
Sorry about that. So yes, the major bus components. So FTA has a requirement how long you have an asset for, and that's a minimum useful life of 12 years. So just because we purchase a brand new vehicle, there's going to be components that we have to change, and we want to be in advance of failure. So a key thing, so LTD purchased 30 electric vehicles. And as you probably know, batteries do have a lifespan. And so this plan also identifies we know we're going to have to replace those batteries because at some point, the batteries aren't going to consistently provide us the range that we need to support the community. And so it's reflected there. So we need batteries. Some other components for just an internal combustion engine, will be looking at a major overhaul of the engine to ensure. So that in that, it's kind of looking at that. So yes, there's a large investment in the initial costs, but there's those midlife things that you need to take and calculate so that you're not losing those things. And so those are two examples that are identified in there.
And is that how we kind of account for the jump in bus component costs around 2028 or 2029? You're thinking of battery replacements, I would assume, 5 years into having those buses.
Yeah, so six, if you're 12 years minimum useful life, 6 years, you're seeing that. And you're seeing a large increase just for batteries aspect with the electric vehicles, but we also support a hybrid fleet. And so there's also that batteries. And I don't want to say it's only batteries. There's traction motors, what actually moves the wheels down. Those things are also part of the replacement. And we're seeing that there's two ways to respond. You can respond on failure, and a lot of those are operational costs, or you can plan on when you can replace those. And so with the data that we have within our fleet, we're seeing those major bus components, traction motors, other components where it's taking DC to AC, it transitions the energy type to help move that on. Those things are failing too. And so having a plan is very helpful so that we're able to get those vehicles out. So very good question and very astute in what you're seeing.
So it seems to me that the promise of cost reduction through electrified buses that's not true. It's sort of maybe more increases in costs because we have to replace the batteries midway through.
That's to be seen. I would say we're planning as far as our community investment plan to see what it is. I do believe you're accurate in your statement, but the facts will play out in regards to what we're seeing. And as you're looking at the total life cycle, there's a lot of batteries that you have to replace. Those are costs that aren't going away. And so you're having to figure out how do you manage those things. You do also, with an internal combustion engine, you just have less components to replace. So the more complicated and more electronics are on there, the more cost are having to be considered in that. So yes, battery electrics, you have a lot of batteries that you're going to have to replace. And we haven't seen, or let me backtrack, you might not have to replace that, but what range your vehicle can go may be impacted. So they're looking at that. So we're saying around 150 miles it can do, and that ebbs and flows based upon weather. But at some point you can say, do I want a bus that only can travel 100 miles before it has to come to the garage, or even less? And the answer is, I'll speak a little bit on behalf of Tom, so Tom can correct me as our director of planning, but that becomes hard to put out into service. And that drives operational costs out there. Thank you.
Matt, quick questions to follow up on the same topic. While the CIP would reflect the increase in costs of, like, say, battery electric type repairs or replacement, it wouldn't reflect the decrease in cost of fuel or those kinds of components.
Good question. Yeah. The intent of this is to looking at your expenses in regards to community planning. So there are benefits, and we don't want to, in regards to, there are fuel savings aspect. That is not where this document lives. I think as you look at long range financial plan, that considers, those different inputs. The CIP does not reflect the savings that may occur in some of those choices you make here.
Cool. Thanks.
Thank you.
Yeah, might be good to let's go ahead and keep moving.
Okay. Thank you. So this next page will just kind of more highlights the fact of where we're investing based upon. We talked about fleet, facilities, as well as tech. And so the red portion is the fleet. So the majority of our state of good repairs is where it should be, is we're investing in the fleet's assets that we currently have, followed by facilities as well as the tech. All right. So the next slide now transitions to the improvement plan, that's where we can talk about the alternative fuels infrastructure. But again, same concept where we're subcategorizing that on facilities, our frequent transit network, our safety and security work, as well as their technology. So those are the categories that we have. You'll see at the top, the overall or year upon year spend, and each subcategory will be summed up. But the facilities is winning the department here, because when you're talking about improvements, most of those improvements are to the facilities that we have. An example of that, what we're doing currently, is LTD is in the process of the design of increasing capacity to our operations command center. So that's an improvement project where you're growing the building to respond to the needs. The other one, and I'll highlight, is the alternative fuels infrastructure. So if LTD makes a decision in regards to switching a propulsion type to whether it be hydrogen or CNG or RNG, I should say, there's going to be an improvement that needs to happen to our facilities to respond to those needs. So you'll see all the projects listed here, and it's broken down, but I will pause. And if maybe another example, right, of an improvement project, and I'll highlight our technology category is our website. So LTD is also making an investment in our website, and that's going to be coming out, if it hasn't already, to make sure some of those new needs are being responded to and things in which we want to be out there. And so you're seeing that project highlighted there. So it's just not facilities, there's some tech aspect. So I will pause if you guys are good with that as some of you digest more of those numbers. But I did fail to highlight, as I promised, the tiering, and I apologize for that. But in this, you'll see the tiers just to the right of the project. So some of them will be tier 1, tier 2, tier 3. Some of them will be tier 1/tier 2. And what that helps us identify is to ensure that we have those we're planning for those particular spends. And so if a project is a tier 1 and tier 2, where we've identified we already have secured the grant, or we have identified the grant we're going after, those numbers are what feeds into the long-range financial plan. So some of the projects, we just don't know if that project will become reality. We're showing that, but we're not taking some of those tier 3 and feeding it into the long-range financial plan, because it just isn't prudent for us. So apologize for not highlighting those tier 1 and tier 2, but that's what you'll see just to the right of the project and what's identified there. With that, I will now pause, answer any questions.
I think you're up, Stephen.
I think so. So I picked out, I don't see it on your chart, but I picked out a $15 million number on that associated with it. That's a big number, obviously. What type of analysis are you doing on that? I wondered if hydrogen is in consideration. It sounds like it is. And what are best practices going on in other agencies around this whole topic?
Good question. I'll say it's not just $15 million. When we looked at kind of bringing on a new propulsion type, there's a lot of expenses from the capital side to bring something in. So
Right.
as you're looking at, say it's hydrogen, and that's the one we've considered two. Both of them are the lighter than air type of vehicles as part of our fleet procurement plan. As we're looking out into the future, what does that look like? So the two major front runners are the hydrogen, as you referenced, as well as the CNG or compressed natural gas or renewable natural gas. And so those fueling stations are relatively costly for the upfront cost. And so we looked at that, we brought those inputs, we've talked to peer agencies as well as talked to consultants who have experience with this, and the people who worked on our fleet procurement plan has that. So as far as best practices, really the fleet, what's the fleet makeup going to be really dictates what that alternative fuel station is. CNG and hydrogen, they're about the same to construct for fuel.
So is anyone else operating CNG or hydrogen now?
Yes, there are. So CNG has actually been very well known across the agency. California, I think, was really a pioneer in that. They're transitioning away from CNG. But CNG is a useful and well-tested vehicle out in the market. And through our fleet procurement analysis, it really looked at what is the operation costs for that, and there's really good proven data for what those operation costs would be. Hydrogen is new, and people are operating that. There are some that are further out than others, and we are amongst a lot of peers where we're talking about these type of things. LTD is involved in many conversations.
So that'll go into some of your consideration as you move forward.
Absolutely.
That's
And-
what I was trying to draw out.
Yeah, so no, I really appreciate it. And part of our fleet procurement is we're addressing this and looking at what's happening on a yearly basis, an annual basis, to make sure that we're tracking what industry's doing and what would make sense for LTD as far as making that. Before we make the decision on a propulsion type, that decision would have to be made, and then the improvement of a particular infrastructure like this would need to obviously be in place in advance to getting those vehicles on site. So they're timed together in some sense, but you want the infrastructure before you get a beautiful bus that you can't fuel. And so when we talk about tiering, you'll notice that is a tier 3 project. So it's pushed out. There hasn't been, we're moving forward with this because it's a broader conversation.
Thank you.
Yes.
That's helpful for me.
I'm assuming that the rideshare facility expansion, $8 million number kind of reflects that same.
Yeah, no, very
thing with
great.
The infrastructure element.
Yep, absolutely. So we've gone through an exercise, but what's going to help support that is we're in the right source operation analysis to see what and how those services can. So there's a need that was presented a few years ago to say that an expansion is a desire. And so as part of that expansion, we wanted to make sure that we're identifying that. So no decision has been made on that. Really, the groundwork is the right source operation analysis to see how we deploy that. There are constraints in that facility. Thankfully, as part of work that we did with the original build, we have some growth opportunity to expand. We have additional property there. And so we're looking at what does that look like, as well as what are the needs. So as you increase vehicles, you will need to increase your garage to respond to those vehicles. That facility has 3 bays in response to a lot of those cutaway vehicles that some of you guys are familiar with, but increased quantity does increase the ability to be able to respond to that. And that's what that's identified. But absolutely, I feel like I'm long-winded in that response. Before we make a decision, we want to have all the inputs before we do that. But what we want to, from a transparency standpoint, sorry to belabor this, is that we see this need and we want to be prudent in regards to this is coming, not to then blindside this community in regards to, oh, this is a project we've never heard about.
I'm interested in learning more about the tier 1 and 2 planning studies that are on here and the FTN planning studies.
Yeah.
So I would assume the one for, so talk about the 2024 one that's already in the works, I would assume. And then in the next 2 years, the significant spending on more planning studies. What are they studying in the next couple of years?
Planning. No. Great question. So those aren't just a singular project. So I today referenced the right source operational analysis. That would be a project within that. We're also looking at the reimagine the ride. We've been talking about that. So the comprehensive operation analysis. There's a lot of, and I don't have the exhaustive list in front of or in my brain, but there's a lot of studies that you're looking year over year. It is, so that as these needs come up. So when we talk about tier 1, some of those are funded. And I'm going to reference LTD just was awarded a grant for, there was a grant that we just were awarded about a month ago, and I should know that, but Tom will tell us exactly what.
We were awarded a $250,000 grant from the state. It's a transportation growth grant through a partnership between DLCD and ODOT.
Oh, Tom, can I get you to speak in the microphone? I think just so everyone can hear. Thank you.
No, thank you. We were awarded a $250,000 grant from the state of Oregon, a partnership between ODOT and the Department of Land Conservation Development, to develop an update to our long range, we're going to call it a long range mobility plan. And that will start, that funding comes from the state, and it will be available to us at the end of this fiscal year. Anything else on the rest of the process? Again, I would, just maybe add some context. The state of Oregon is a heavy planning requirement state. And as partners to a regional process, the MPO, Metropolitan Planning Organization, has a planning process to meet federal requirements, and then Eugene, Springfield, Lane County all have state level planning requirements. And so transit's a big part of all those plans, and that's what we're doing, is basically coordinating with their planning processes.
So just because it's under the FTN, the Frequent Transit Network category, I was immediately thinking more EMX related,
Oh,
not
no.
wider net than that. But it's actually like the comprehensive service analysis this year. Yeah.
Yes.
Great clarification. Thanks, Jess. And thank you, Tom. Go ahead, Matt.
Any other questions? It gave me a breather, so I appreciate that, Tom. I guess I'll switch to the next slide and just highlight in the improvement portion, we didn't see any changes from last time we presented to the committee. And this one, this graph kind of shows a large expense in the fiscal year 27 and 28. You see this large thing, and I just want to highlight, as we see projects coming, we've consciously made a decision that anything that's tier 3 and higher are going to find themselves outside of that 3 years. And so the alternative fuels is part of that, as well as the right source. And so you see this large increase, again, highlighting those aren't secured funding. We don't know where it's coming from. So that's not going to be a spend, but we're seeing that thing track. But that's why you see a large increase in those 2 fiscal years. And the large increase in blue is the facilities improvements. But you see that, and you'll have more fluctuation in regards to some of your improvement projects because they're one-time costs that come and hit the projects. So I want to highlight that. And then Tom made this a hot mic. I don't know what he did. So I guess bringing it together with the state of good repair and improvements, that's what this slide, next slide, will show you, is bringing them all and just graphically shows those investments. And if you look at the bottom portion of that graph, you'll see it the same kind of color, and that's looking at the fleet. So you're having that kind of balance, and as much as you can for the state of good repair, you're wanting to balance the spend and the investment year over year, and that's shown there. So the 2 colors, and I see orange, blue, and then there's another color in there. I'd say that the cutoff is just above the blue. Those things are your state of good repair projects that are listed in this graphically. So it highlights that we are investing and planning to invest in the appropriate things, and that's to keep service and our assets on the road. The next few slides that you'll be able to peruse is really just adding context to the project. So you'll have a lot of words. I don't plan on reading that, but that is an opportunity if you guys have any questions about this. Let me just say, I can read that if you guys are really wanting to. I see. I appreciate you guys say no. So with that, I guess give another opportunity for any type of questions that you may have. But if not, I really appreciate your time. And
No one can say you're not a generous person, Matt. So yeah, Susan, go ahead.
Well, first of all, I really love the whole concept of state of good repair. I think there's could be a lot of applications for that. One of the concerns or questions I have, all of the new innovations that we're talking about are going to require expertise and skills that are not necessarily already available for training. Is there a budget for that? But that's been accommodated in all of the thinking.
For clarification, are you thinking from bringing on a new bus technology?
Yeah, I mean, just the repairs. I mean, we've talked about how it's not necessarily something that is in-house now.
Yeah, so there's absolutely the forethought to make sure that technicians are. And so right now LTD is in the leadership of Mr. Evers over there, we're investing in that technology training. There isn't anyone locally or regionally that can tell you how to work on a transit bus electric vehicle. And so the experts really come from in-house. And so we've made investments with staff and continue to invest in staff. And just today, as I was walking through the shop, you had a team of people that are coming in early just to get additional training for how to repair some of the electric vehicles. So it's not you get training and you leave it. You consistently do that, and that's what's represented in the work that Eric is putting on. So when you look at adding a different propulsion type, you know, some of the components are going to be the same. The propulsion is different, right? And so how do you ensure that your technicians are competent in a way? And there's, again, we've invested in that, and we continue to will. So whatever decision is made in regards to propulsion, there will be a cost to the training, and we'll be able to respond to that.
Thank you.
Can I add on a little bit? So that's a really good question, and it goes to workforce. And we are keenly watching workforce. We're in the process now of working with ATU, our union, to put together an apprenticeship program and looking at how do we continue to build a pipeline of qualified, skilled folks to keep up with the technology. So more to come on that, probably calendar first quarter of 24, our third quarter. So stay tuned on that.
Just checking. Last call. Better check online with Darvin. Do you have any questions for Matt?
No, none.
Great. Looks like no. Thank you very much, Matt.
Okay, we'll try this one again. That sounds okay. All right. Okay, for those of you who've been waiting for the bottom line, this is your slide. Total resources are you see on here and total requirements. And then the second line up from the bottom, total revenues minus total requirements. So that is our bottom line for our long-range financial plan. It's important to know that our actual spending throughout the years are based on our annual budget, which goes through several public meetings and is voted on by the board. It will be informed by revenue projections and updates and cost indicators. So in our current long-range financial plan, you are seeing some shortfalls up there, though I'll talk about those in just a moment and how we plan to cover each of those. And it'll be from our unrestricted working capital. The bottom line that's on there is just a repeat of the other line showing what our service levels are planned to be. So those are really the two bottom line amounts for our long range financial plan is the shortfall or surpluses by year, and then where our service levels are planned to be. So, okay, next slide, Allie. So this is just a visual again of our total overall revenue. The average increase is proposed to be at 2.71%. It varies from year to year, but that's the average amount over the 10-year period. Then the next slide shows the total requirements, and that has a slightly smaller increase year over the average years, and starting at about $49 million in pre-pandemic 2019 and ending at $97 million. So, okay, Allie, next slide is so. And this chart shows total revenues in green and total requirements in blue. As a percentage of the total requirements, our shortfalls, the shortfall amount is about 1.2%. So although I'd rather have it be on the other side of the line, you know, it is a small amount in comparison to our overall total requirements. So, okay, next slide. All right, so you're probably asking, all right, what are we going to do with that if we, even though our shortfalls might be not major compared to our total requirements, this is what we plan to do. So due to good budgeting and very a conservative and good use of our COVID funding, we are in a place where our working capital is higher than it was even pre-pandemic. And so year over year, we will be able to even, this is a forecast. I know those numbers are going to change, but even if they stay the same year over year, we will still be able to have enough resources for operating and just using our unrestricted capital budget, unrestricted reserve funds. So, and you can best see that in this graph here. So this graph reflects our total working capital that we have. And on the numbers, if you look at the right column in the numbers, so in 2019, we had a total of about 20 million in working capital, the total working capital was about 14 million. And out of that, 6 million was unrestricted. The other amount, which is reflected in the blue section, is the amount that by Oregon budget law we're required to keep a certain amount on hand. It's called an appropriated ending fund balance. That's the technical term for it. So in the blue, you can see that's the amount that we have to keep on hand. The green is the amount that is unrestricted. And at pre-pandemic, our unrestricted balance was about 6 million. And then you can see flowing through the different years. And then in this long-range financial plan, we would end up at about 7.3 million of unrestricted working capital. So, okay, moving forward then, we will be focusing on some specific areas. We're looking at and for alternative revenue sources, as well as taking an even deeper dive into what drives our costs. We'll be working looking at savings from our recent investments in technology and the cost that reductions that will bring. And as we explore what it means to be the area's mobility manager, we'll be analyzing the impacts of that financially along with the service changes. Okay, that concludes my presentation, and I'd be happy to answer any questions that you might have about the last few slides.
Great, thanks, Pamela. Yes, looking around, any questions? Go ahead, Stephen.
So the $36 million working capital is a great number in my history anyway. I would have liked to have had that somewhere. You look back 20 years. If you looked back 20 years, what would that have been just roughly?
You know, I don't know. I would not even be able to venture a guess. I can look it up for you, but yeah. Yeah, I can tell you what's interesting to me in the working capital, but also in just the numbers back on. So on these slides, just looking at the growth in revenues and requirements during this 15-year period is really what stuck out in my mind. You know, almost a doubling in that period of time, and to have that type of growth in both revenues and cost, and then still be in a position where we have enough working capital that we're able to cover, those shortfalls, I think is really a testament to some good financial management that's gone on here.
Totally agree.
Yeah,
that's really helping you move this forward in a way that's a soft landing, if you will.
Well, yes, because so let me go back to, I kind of skipped over one thing in this other slide that I did want to mention. Just a moment here. Allie, can you go back to the, it's the slide that I started on with this section. Yeah, that one, the draft working capital. Can you see that one? That should be the fourth slide back.
It's on page 39 if you're following along
Thank
in
you.
the
Yes, page 39.
packet.
So, um, so in the, in
Early
this,
electronic
in the
warrant.
fiscal year 23 budget, oh, wait till she gets it back. Looks like that. Right, it is page 39. Yeah, do you guys have it? So, okay, I'll keep going then. So in the fiscal year 23 budget, it was decided to establish a sustainable services reserve. So as a new fund, completely separate from the general fund. And the board policy was decided to set that amount at either at somewhere between 2 months of operating costs to 6 months of operating costs. So the first year was funded at the full 2 months of operating costs, and that amounts right at around $11 million. So that is a completely separate fund. Purpose of that fund was to smooth out those years. And based on what happened during the pandemic and without the federal government's assistance, that would have been a much more serious situation for us. I think it was really smart to be able to take some of what was happening during that period of time and set it aside. What was interesting during that, we had budgeted for a drop in our payroll taxes because we obviously thought, things are happening here. People are not going to be able to work. We expected a drop in payroll taxes. That didn't happen. Our payroll taxes actually increased during that period because the largest employers in our area, if you think about who they are, then they continued to pay their employees health care, education. So their employees continued to get paid. So that wage base didn't really drop at all. Even so, we have budgeted conservatively. And so we did end up with some surplus because of that. And I think it was really smart for them to decide that we would set that aside for future situations where things may go up and down. So when I was working on this long-range financial plan, that was the original plan, was to take a look at the sustainable services reserve and then go in and out of that. But when we got it to the point where it was like, okay, this is where we are, we actually had enough operating capital that it would look like it would carry us through this full 10 years of planning. So that's on this slide. That's why I'd put, we can continue to use that. It's very easy. It's available. It's, basically it's reflected in our budget as beginning and ending working capital. The alternative would be to take a portion of that and go ahead and set it aside and put it in that sustainable services reserve. It's still available, still accessible to us. It just takes a little bit more work because it's literally in a different fund. So you have to think ahead budget-wise, plan to take the money out, transfer it out in and out. So I'm not asking for a decision on that tonight. I just wanted to let you know that that possibility, we could talk about that when we talk about the budget too in the spring. So, okay, I know.
Great. Any other questions for Pamela? Just checking online.
No, thanks, Pam.
Excellent. Okay.
All right.
Well, I guess.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. And if I'm not mistaken, that concludes our meeting today. I just wanted to take the time to thank Pamela and Matt for their presentations today, and as well as Jameson for his leadership of LTD. Thank you to the board members who are here, as well as our LTD committee members for the budget committee. And with that, I will go ahead and adjourn the meeting.